I was born deaf, so I never knew anything different. My mom learned to sign right away, and that's how we would communicate. My dad, however, didn't want anything to do with signing, or with me. He was super traditional and religious, and it seemed like he thought he was being punished somehow by having a deaf child. My sister that came before me was absolutely perfect, and she was the apple of my father's eye. My sister was nice enough to me and could sign well enough that we could communicate, but she was just your typical teenager. She was popular and pretty, and all the boys loved her. The girls loved her too. She had an endless string of friends phoning and showing up at the house. Of course, the phone never rang for me, nor did the doorbell ever ring by someone there to see me. It was a lonely existence, I'll say that. It was a silent world. My mom had taken me to a school for the deaf when I was little, so I could learn to talk. Everyone at the school signed, but the real goal was to teach us to talk so the hearing world could understand us too. It was different for some of the kids who weren't born deaf. They could remember the sounds of voices, of their voice, and how words sounded, but I couldn't. When I tried to talk in the privacy of my room, I had no idea what the sounds would be coming out. I imagined them as sounding feral, animalistic somehow. As hard as they tried to push me at the school to talk or make a sound, I never did. There was one teacher there in particular who really tried to get through to me. I was stubborn though. I had always been this way and didn't see a need to change. I know their reasoning was so I could go out into the hearing world, but why would I want to do that? Why would I want to be a part of a world that didn't include me? When I was 12, my sister was 15. She had a different boy on her arm every weekend, it seemed. That was when I discovered I had a way to make boys like me that didn't involve me having to make a sound. At 12, I looked older. I didn't know much, but I knew I was pretty. I looked a lot like my sister, and she always told me how pretty I would be when I was older. I was tall and slim with thick, curly brown hair that hung past my shoulders. I had big green eyes with long, curled eyelashes. I had seen and felt boys looking at me, especially the ones my sister brought round. I'm not sure what had come over me on this particular day, but shortly after I turned 12, I was ready to make some connections of my own. My sister had this boy, Ben, that she brought around often. They were just friends. Had been since they were young. But I had always had a crush on him. He was 15, like my sister. He had always been so nice to me. He was the only friend of my sister's who ever tried to talk to me. I would just smile and nod. I could read lips very well, but of course I wouldn't try and communicate back to him. He would talk away, and I could tell he felt awkward about it, but was the kind of guy to feel more awkward about just ignoring me. I had seen Ben come in the front door, but Sarah had gone out. My mom said he could wait, but he had politely declined. I was out in the front yard when he came out the door. "Nice day, isn't it?" he asked me. I nodded and smiled at him. In that moment, I realized I wanted more from him, much more. I wanted to know what it was like to be held by a boy, kissed by a boy, as I knew Sarah was often. I gestured for him to follow me, which he did. We had a shed out back at the bottom of the garden. I looked around and didn't see any eyes on us, so walked through the shed's door and closed it behind us. "What are we doing in here?" Ben asked innocently. I was on the other side of the shed. Not that it was far, but I coyly lifted up my skirt to just above my knees. It was clear what I wanted, and I could see Ben swallow the lump that had formed in his throat. He said he wasn't sure if this was okay, but I nodded and pulled him closer to me. I lay down on the floor and pulled my shirt up again. He took the hint, and that day, I learned what all the fuss was about. I felt like I wasn't a little girl anymore, and I loved it. I couldn't talk and hang out like normal hearing girls. But maybe this was something I could do just as well as hearing girls. Ben smiled at me awkwardly afterwards as he was doing up his zipper. He cleared his throat and said, is this something we're keeping between us? I nodded, and he seemed relieved. He kissed me goodbye and discreetly left the shed. I waited for a few minutes before I left and returned to my room in the house. I couldn't stop smiling. For the first time in my life, I felt somewhat normal, like I had something to actually offer boys. Looking back, I know it was the wrong thing to offer, or to feel like I had to offer, but that's just how I felt. I had developed early and gotten my first period when I was only 11. So when my period didn't come in the next 2 weeks when it was supposed to, I was confused. I didn't know much about the birds and the bees, but I knew not getting your period when you were supposed to definitely meant something. I waited and waited, but it didn't come. I was afraid to talk to anyone about it, but my fear of what it meant outweighed the fear of telling someone. I waited until one day when my mom and I were home alone. I sat down across the table from her and signed that I had something to talk to her about. She was all ears, or eyes, I should say. I signed that I suspected I had done something I shouldn't have. I could see the fear dart through her eyes, but I could tell she was trying her best not to show it. I told her about Ben, about the shed, about how I just wanted to feel normal, like my big sister. I saw the tears form in her eyes when I said that. She asked me how late my period was, and when I told her 2 weeks, she said we should go get a pregnancy test before we started to panic. We went into town, bought a test, and went straight home to take it. It, not surprisingly, came back positive. I could tell my mom was trying to hold it together. I could imagine she was the most concerned about telling my father. He had already seemed freaked out enough by me. I couldn't imagine this would help at all. When my dad came home that night, my mom told me to stay in my room, which I was more than happy to do. One thing about being deaf, at least you didn't have to hear your parents arguing. I did, however, peek around the corner to see what was happening, and I could see arms flailing and read the odd word from my parents. I saw disaster, so young, and mistake more than once. I ran back up to my room and waited for my mom to come talk to me. She came up a while later and told me my dad had gone out for a drink, but not to worry, that he needed some time to process the news but would come around. I asked her what she meant by come around, and she said, well, about the baby, of course. The more we talked, the more I got that my mom was planning on me keeping this baby. I wasn't sure what I thought about it, but I knew 12 was pretty young to have a baby. My mom assured me that she would be doing the lion's share of caring for it. The more I thought about it, the more I liked the idea of a little baby. I bet to that little baby, there wouldn't be anything wrong with me. I would just be its mom. So I got bigger and bigger, and my dad grew more and more distant. My sister was a little upset, but also very happy about the thought of having a little niece in the house to gush over. Ben still came around, and the meeting with his parents where we told them what was happening was definitely tense. His parents offered to help out as much as we needed, though, and they had a lot more money than we did, so we felt like we had a lot of support. 2 months before the baby was due, my dad left. He couldn't take it. He said he was too young to be a granddad, and he was worried about the baby being deaf, too. He said he always knew I would be trouble, and that he had been a patient man for many years, but that this was just too much to take. My mom was sad, but said she saw this coming years ago, and was actually surprised he had stuck around as long as he did. So it was a house of girls now. We turned my room into half a nursery and got ready for the big arrival. I couldn't believe I was about to become a mother at 12, but you take what life deals you. I learned my lesson from that afternoon in the shed with Ben. I realized there are lots of different ways to get attention from people, but that there was such a thing as the wrong kind of attention. I was lucky that Ben was such a nice guy. I could have picked the wrong guy and had quite the different experience. By the time the baby came, we were more than ready. My sister had painted my room for a fresh look, and the house was stocked with diapers, onesies, pretty much everything we would need. People felt sorry for us, but most of all for my mom. To be on her own raising 2 girls, one deaf, who was about to have a baby at 12, she was a strong woman and was well respected around town. The week the baby was born, the doorbell was constantly ringing with people dropping off casseroles and lasagnas. It was great. I loved my little daughter, and my mom and I tag-teamed looking after her. I definitely wouldn't have been able to do any of it without my mom. I named my daughter Betty after a favorite character of mine from a book I had read. When Betty was 4 months old, we had her hearing tested, and were happy to find out she was perfectly healthy and normal in every way. I was a little disappointed that we wouldn't exist in my silent world together, but I wanted better for her, so was happy about the news. I wouldn't recommend becoming a mother at 12, but thanks to my support system, I felt like I finally belonged with and to someone. To watch more animated story videos like this, hit that subscribe button. And tell us in the comments section what you thought about this story.